In the early decades of the 19th century, naturalist Henry David Thoreau described Moosehead Lake as a suitably wild-looking sheet of water, sprinkled with small, low islands which were covered with shaggy spruce and other wildwood. Seen over the infant port of Greenville with mountains on each side and far in the north, and a steamer smoke pipe rising above a roof. Over 30 miles long and from 3 to 12 miles wide, Moosehead Lake is the largest body of fresh water contained in the state of Maine. Because the lake represented a natural highway to and from Maine's rich timber stands, the logging industry heralded in the region's age of steamboating. In 1835, the Maine State Legislature granted the Moosehead Lake Steam Navigation Company a 12-year monopoly on the use of steam as a motor force on the lake. Early in the fall, steamers carried men and supplies to logging camps which were serviced by the vessels until ice closed navigation. As soon as the lake was clear of ice, logs were corralled into large groups known as rafts. Steamers towed these rafts to the outlets of the Kennebec River, where swift currents carried them to Maine's burgeoning industry. With the coming of railroads, special seasonal schedules were established for local steamboat companies, permitting tourists to enjoy a relaxing weekend of outdoor fun and still be home for work by Monday morning. Trains featuring sleeping, parlor, and dining cars from as far away as New York City ran through to Moosehead shores, where waiting steamers took passengers to the many hotels, sporting camps, and small towns which were only accessible by boat. Over 70 vessels, from sloops and two-masted schooners, side-wheel steamships, and propeller-driven craft alike, have plied the big lake. The end of the steamboat era came at a time when it was cheaper to abandon the vessels rather than cut them up for scrap. With continued expansion of roads into regions once dependent upon steamers, there was little need for the large passenger carriers. "17 shipwrecks have been found in Moosehead's depths. Of these, 6 surround Steamboat Point, former shipyard of the Coburn Steamboat Company. The steamer Twilight was built in 1911 at the West Cove Shipyard on Steamboat Point. Built entirely of wood, she was 96 feet in length, had a 20-foot beam, and was owned by the Coburn Steamboat Company. One season's profits from the vessels Katahdin and Moosehead paid for Twilight's construction. Twilight plied the lake for nearly 30 years, servicing Deer Island, Sugar Island, Lily Bay, Kineo, Subumic, and on to Northeast Cary, over 35 miles from Greenville. February 26, 1941, the Bangor Daily News reported, "Old Moosehead steamer sinks. Twilight found at winter mooring with stern underwater. It was theorized that nearly 28 inches of surrounding ice crushed her hull. As the years passed, Twilight slipped deeper into Moosehead's muddy embrace. Today a barge rests, mostly submerged along the starboard side of Twilight, which lies on a marked list to starboard approximately 30 feet off Steamboat Point. Wreckage can be seen just below the surface. Located on the western shore of the Big Lake, about 1,500 feet from the motel restaurant Kelly's Landing in Greenville Junction, Twilight makes a spectacular ice dive. Power augers are used to bore through over 3 feet of ice, literally routing out the hole. Divers enter the water attached to a line controlled by a surface tender. A series of tugs upon the line are used to communicate when to let out or take in the slack. Beneath the frozen surface, the lake is still. No wind-driven currents or swells to muddy the water. Only the sound of exhaled breaths bubbling to the ceiling of ice, cracking and groaning under the weight of those above. Twilight's pilot house, all of the upper deck, and most of the main deck superstructure have been raised off by the relentless action of ice and heaped upon the barge. The skeletal remains of her port bow superstructure are parallel to the water's surface, clearly leveled by winter's ice, only a few feet above. At the bow, the main deck is covered by as little as 3 feet of water. The Samson post and capstan mount, seen here aboard Katahdin, last of Moosehead's large passenger carriers, can still be seen aboard Twilight. Regrettably, the capstan is missing. The deck hatch gapes open, inviting a diver to explore the forwardmost compartment. Below the main deck level, a row of portholes can be seen. The actual fittings have long since been removed by vandals. The unauthorized removal of artifacts from any shipwreck on, embedded in, or under Maine State property is prohibited. The Maine State Museum holds title to all submerged cultural resources. The removal of material from any state-owned resource is a civil violation punishable by a fine of up to $1,000. Twilight's rudder and a three-bladed iron propeller are still in place at a depth of 30 feet. Although most of the superstructure has collapsed, the aftmost deck cabin and all of the hull are penetrable. This cabin may have once housed the crew's quarters. The cabin of the upper promenade deck has long since collapsed, leaving the roof pancaked atop its floor, overhanging the starboard side. 50 years underwater has preserved her wooden hull. However, the iron fastenings holding it together have not fared well at all. Only those experienced in shipwreck penetration should board the vessel. Entry is gained through a doorway on the port side of the stern. The staircase to the promenade deck lies amidships. As early as 1990, Twilight's staircase was in a remarkable state of preservation. Today, however, it's partially collapsed, largely due in part to the weight of upper deck material and the vessel's radical list. The passage leading forward from this point is a tangle of fallen beams and electric wires. The corridor beyond opens up along the starboard side of the main deck superstructure. Between Twilight and the barge, this region has been roofed over by wreckage. Fish congregate in the spaces around the shattered engine room, which still contains a rust-covered three-cylinder engine, most resembling the Fairbanks & Morse diesel, which replaced Twilight's steam plant in 1922. Circular ports along the main deck may also have been added at this time, as most archival photographs of the vessel show square ports. On the right side of the forwardmost cylinder, control levers are encased in corrosion. It's a tight squeeze dropping into the hull between the engine and main deck level. This must be done carefully to avoid stirring up a layer of sediment which covers everything. On the starboard side of the engine can be found compressed air cylinders used to start the big diesel. Forward of the engine, on the starboard overhead, an electric light bulb hangs in its socket. Continuing forward, amidship is Twilight's steam heating boiler. On its front face, through 5 decades of corrosion, the manufacturer's plaque reads, Almy Water Tube Boiler Company, Builders, Providence, Rhode Island, patented number 1142, with a possible date of 1922, the same year the vessel's steam engine was replaced. Forward of the boiler, to starboard, lie 2 long cylindrical tanks. The outer tank is affixed to the inner hull wall. Its inboard counterpart is leaning against the forwardmost bulkhead, partially blocking a doorway to the bow compartment. These are most likely fuel tanks, as the exhaust bubbles of divers exploring this realm bring an oil slick to the surface. Off the northern shore of Steamboat Point, like 2 vessels tentatively identified as the steamers Keno and Priscilla. A photograph taken in 1951, found at the Moosehead Marine Museum in Greenville, claimed this to be the steamship Keno, which bears a strong resemblance to this version of the steamer Louisa. It would seem many of Moosehead's steamers were built from similar, not the same, plans. 2 conflicting records give the year of Keneo's construction as 1884 and 1897. Built at Greenville, the other at Keno. Information which would prove invaluable in identifying this wreck as the Keno was found in the vessel's 1912 and 1917 Maine State Steamboat Inspector Certificates of Inspection. Her engine was listed as a two-cylinder compound, the high-pressure cylinder measuring 9 inches in diameter, the low-pressure cylinder 15 inches, and with a stroke of 1 foot. She was also fitted with a steam-operated feedwater pump. The wreckage lies at the end of an old ship's ways. The bottom drops off markedly from shore, disappearing into blackness, while the ship's ways, two widely spaced wooden rails, slope off gradually. With the top of the ways illuminated, its long log tripod supports plunge into seeming infinity. The rails end at a depth of 15 feet. The burned-out hulk of the steamer lies another 15 feet below. The two-cylinder compound steam engine with a steam-powered feedwater pump on the port side are still in place. Although corrosion made measuring difficult, the cylinder diameters match those of Keno's certificates of inspection. The engine most resembles those manufactured by James H. Payne & Sons Incorporated of Noank, Connecticut, as well as this single-cylinder true vertical engine manufactured by the Edward S. Clark Company of Boston. This type was one of the first to be applied to propeller-driven vessels and is not much unlike its paddle wheel forefather. Although Payne did business with Moosehead steamship companies, their records don't list the Keno specifically. However, the engine could have been purchased secondhand. Beneath the low-pressure cylinder in the background can be seen one of the engine's cranks. Measuring 6 inches in length, the total piston stroke would be 1 foot. Under a shattered fantail stern, her propeller shaft is corked with a wooden stopper. Most likely she was stripped of everything salvageable, towed to the end of the ways, and there set ablaze. In the shallows near where Steamboat Point and the mainland rejoin lie 75 feet of wreckage, tentatively identified as the steamship Priscilla. This identification was based upon comparison of structural details in an archival photograph of the vessel and underwater photographs of the wreck. Built at the West Cove Shipyard in 1901, Priscilla measured 70 feet in length and served the Coburn Steamboat Company as a general excursion vessel and mail carrier. Aboard the wreck, most of a 4-foot-high section of cabin wall with 5 window frames is in place. The interior cabin woodwork still shows pink recessed panels and molding with white trim. Another structure of comparison is the port side deck railing. Although this early photograph of the steamer Louisa has similar cabin structures, the deck railing ruled her out. Covered by as little as 8 feet of water, the intact fantail stern is dominated by a large towing bit. A portion of a towing bit can just be seen in the Priscilla photograph. No other photograph of a comparable vessel has been found with a similar towing structure visible. Behind this bit, the rudder's emergency steering post pierces the deck. In case rudder control was lost at the helm, a tiller could have been used from this point to steer the vessel. At a depth of 20 feet, her rudder is still in place. However, both propeller and shaft are missing. At one time, the offices, warehouse, and railroad terminus of the Coburn Steamboat Company were located on Junction Wharf in Greenville Junction. Formed on July 16, 1892, the Coburn Steamboat Company immediately began purchasing steamboats and establishing routes about the lake. By 1926, the Coburn Company was the only organization maintaining steamboats with set routes and regular schedules. Today, Junction Wharf is the site of a public boat ramp and landing with plenty of free parking and public restrooms. In 1992, when the Katahdin was hauled stern first upon the northern ramp at Junction Wharf for propeller shaft work, people looking over the port bow reported seeing the outline of a vessel. And that's just what they saw. In 10 feet of water, she rises off the bottom no more than a couple of feet. However, the vessel's rudder stock and tiller arm indicate the hull below may still exist. The rudder stock has been forced up, bending the tiller arm, as if some weight had been applied from beneath. Except for the occasional summer home, the scenery along the shores of the big lake has changed little since the days of large passenger steamboats. In the mid-1800s, the poet James Russell Lowell voyaged aboard the steamer Moosehead and wrote, "There were 3 or 4 clearings on the western shore, but after passing these, the lake became wholly primeval, and looked to us as it did to the first adventurous Frenchmen who paddled across it. On all sides rose deep blue mountains of remarkably graceful outline, and more fortunate than common in their names. There were the Big and Little Squaw, the Spencer and Lily Bay Mountains. It was debated whether we saw Katahdin or not, and presently Mount Keno rose abruptly before us. Rising like Gibraltar to a height of 1,806 feet above sea level, the Indian of the Abenaki Confederacy named the mountain Keno after one of their great chiefs. The largest deposit of flint-like felsitic rhyolite east of the Mississippi, Keneo's sheer cliffs soar 778 feet above the surface of Moosehead Lake. Located midway up the lake, Keno is a natural stopping-off place for both Indian and settler alike. In 1840, John Bradbury of Bangor, Maine bought the Keno Peninsula for $325, 1,150 acres in all. In 1844, Bradbury built a small tavern which was enlarged over the years into a fishing and shooting camp. Succumbing to fire in 1868, the Keno House was rebuilt in 1871, but again burned October 29th of 1882. The hotel was again rebuilt, but this time along broader and more modern lines, opening July 30th, 1884 to a gala celebration. Keno reached its peak in 1907 when the Maine Central Railroad completed its line to Rockwood, only a mile across the lake from Keno. The hotel complex boasted its own electrical power plant, as well as a fire hydrant system, the discarded remnants of which can still be seen beneath the waters of Keno Cove today. Guests of the Keno had their choice of luxury rivaling any other resort in the state of Maine, with a simple camp life in one of the many cottages owned by the hotel company. Boat rentals for any type of aquatic activity could be arranged from the hotel's fleet of watercraft. Many private yachts based out of Keno, where the Moosehead Lake Yacht Club was formed in August of 1907 for those with a penchant for competition and cruising fun. However, the Grand Hotel's days were numbered. By 1937, the Maine Central Railroad owned Keno, but could no longer afford to operate the massive resort. The following year, a fire destroyed the main building after demolition work had commenced. At its peak, the hotel complex could accommodate over 500 guests in unrivaled splendor. As of 1995, all that remained was a 50-room dormitory, the former Moosehead Lake Yacht Club building, and the remnant of a 48-room annex, upon which demolition work had commenced by the end of that summer. In the mouth of Keno Cove lies the wreck of an unidentified steamer. Resting on its port side and separated from the main body of wreckage, the vessel's bow rises 10 feet off the bottom. Photographs of one of the Keno Company steamers have structural details similar in comparison to those of the wreck. Unfortunately, the vessel's name board is too blurred to read. The boilers of both the wreck and the Keno Company boat are of the vertical fire tube type. In this type, the hot gases of combustion pass through tubes which penetrate a sealed water chamber within which steam is generated. Behind the boiler stands a compound steam engine. In front of the forwardmost or high-pressure cylinder can be seen the linkage controlling emission and exhaust of steam to and from the cylinder. One method to identify the wreck involves calculating the engine's horsepower to determine the vessel's waterline length, and comparing this measure with the waterline length of the 1912 Keno Company boat, which can be determined by comparison of dock structures in the background of the photograph, which have survived at Keno to this day. By measuring the diameter of the cylinders and the length of the piston stroke, the engine's horsepower can be determined. For non-planing hulls, there is a direct speed to length ratio. Only a specific horsepower is required to drive the hull at its maximum speed. Any additional horsepower is wasted money, weight, and fuel economy. Increased horsepower requires greater steam volume, bigger and heavier boilers, and more fuel. Aft and to port of the engine is a feed water pump, too corroded for positive identification. However, comparison can be made to pumps still in service. This pump is aboard the steam launch Kettle Cove, one of over 40 privately owned steamers which attend the annual Lee's Mills Steamboat Meet held the weekend after Labor Day at Lee's Mills on Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire. Buried within the sediment near the engine of the wreck was found a spare gauge glass manufactured by the Libby Company. The gauge glass is used to indicate the water level in a boiler. The valves above and below the gauge glass are used to isolate the gauge in case the glass breaks. The smaller valves along the side of the boiler, known as tricocks, would then be used to check the water level until a spare glass could be installed. Within the wreck's shattered stern, a lifeboat davit lies, similar in comparison to davits aboard the Keno Company steamer. In the vicinity of the old Alice Plywood Company site in Greenville lie two vessels tentatively identified as the sidewheelers Governor Coburn and Ferry of the Lake. In 1858, the tall stacked wood-burning sidewheeler Ferry of the Lake was built at the boatyard in Greenville by Major Benjamin S. Bigney for the proprietor of the Eveleth House. Major Bigney built many of Moosehead's early steamers. Although no archival evidence has been found to indicate the ferry was rebuilt, comparison of the following photographs would seem to suggest that she was. Note the position of the pilot house, as well as the detailing around the paddle box. The absence of a smokestack in this 1886 photograph may indicate the vessel was being rebuilt. The steamer could carry 300 passengers and was reportedly still in freight service as late as 1896. Covered by as little as 5 feet of water, her shattered bow is full of debris. Only the outline of a ship is visible. Moving aft, the hull takes shape and portholes can be seen. Amidships, machinery was found. The Ferry of the Lake was reportedly powered by a 200 horsepower square, low-pressure, true vertical engine, which originally powered a towboat in New York Harbor. The engine next saw service aboard the Sebago Lake steamer until 1858, when it was hauled to Moosehead and built into the ferry. Although the vessel has a fantail frame deck, the stern is square. It was again the close examination and comparison of archival photographs and the following underwater photographs that identified this wreck as the Ferry of the Lake. In the upper right-hand corner of the transom can be seen a hole for the passage of the vessel's steering chains. The vertical timber in the background is the rudder post, attached to which is the forwardmost part of the rudder. The same structure can be seen from a different perspective aboard the wreck. Note the rust conglomerations on the rudder's head, where once steering and restraining chains were attached. Unfortunately, the fantail over the stern of the wreck has collapsed. However, the rectangular structure in the background does bear a striking resemblance to the sternline chalk of the steamer. Between the ferry, the lake, and shore lies another wreck in as little as 3 feet of water. There's very little left. However, information gathered at the Moosehead Marine Museum suggested that the side wheel of Governor Coburn lay in the vicinity. The vessel's bow is unrecognizable. 43 feet from this foremost part of the ship was found a 7-foot square brickwork base with scattered iron bars, suggesting the steamer's boiler base and grates for burning solid fuel. 56 feet from the bow, these structural elements parallel the keelson for a length of 20 feet. Possibly engine supports, the Governor Coburn had a high-paying steeple-type walking beam engine. Only about 2 feet of the vessel's keel and stern post are left, likely the results of ice freezing to the bottom and carrying away portions of wreckage. The presence of this iron structure known as a gudgeon is the only way to tell which end of this wreck was which. The gudgeon is a socket-like fitting attached to the stern post of the vessel into which the pintle attached to the rudder would fit, forming the hinge upon which the rudder swings. The tall stacked wood-burning side wheel of Governor Coburn was built in 1872 at the boatyard in Greenville by Major Bigney. Of 90 tons burthen, her great size was due in part to the heavy work she was called upon to perform. Condemned in 1895, she was reportedly broken up for scrap. Operated seasonally for scenic lake cruises, the Moosehead Marine Museum's 115-foot passenger vessel Katahdin is the last of an era. Built in 1914 by Bath Iron Works, the finish hull, number 63, was cut into sections, shipped by rail to Greenville Junction, and there reassembled. Built to replace the first steamer Katahdin, which burned and sank on May 13, 1913, the new Katahdin is the oldest BIW-built ship still in operation anywhere in the world. In 1923, her steam engine was replaced with a Fairbanks and Morse diesel. Today, twin diesels swinging a single propeller power the vessel. In the winter of 1993, Bath Iron Works was contracted to replace Katahdin's hull, which had worn thin with age. To lift the Kate out of the water, a berth was prepared next to the Moosehead Marine Museum. Steel girders were passed through the hull and attached to the vessel's frames. Slow, steady lift was applied using hydraulic jacks, and over the course of 2 weeks, the vessel was raised from the lake. Although her hull was built away, Katahdin was laid out and designed along similar lines to those of her predecessors. By touring Katahdin, we get a glimpse into the era of Thoreau and Lowell, when steamships were king on Moosehead Lake. There are plenty of fine, reasonably priced restaurants around Greenville. For those not inclined to sleeping aboard ship or tenting at one of the many private or state campgrounds, there are also numerous motels and bed and breakfasts. The closest dive support facilities to the Moosehead Lake region are Maine Diver Scuba Center in Bangor and Aqua City Scuba in Waterville. Both are approximately 90 minutes from the lake, but in opposite directions. For more non-diving information and a free visitor's guide to the region, call the Moosehead Lake Chamber of Commerce at area code 207-695-2702. Come voyage aboard the Moosehead Marine Museum's motor vessel Katahdin, offering scenic cruises and catered charters of Maine's largest lake. Conveniently located in downtown Greenville, Big Lake Equipment and Marina offers both marine-related and snowmobile sales service and accessories. Kelly's Landing is fully accessible by boat, snowmobile, seaplane, and car. Listen to the call of the loons while you enjoy the peace and tranquility of their beautiful rooms and lakeside restaurant. This has been a Recluse production.